Hello, all you students of the Word. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you tuned in. Today we're dealing with book of James still in our Bible study, but we're beginning the 4th chapter. And today we'll be focusing on verses 1 through 7. Hopefully we get through all of them. If you haven't done so already, I know I keep asking this, but it's extremely important. Please pause the video, just push the pause button for a moment, read through the whole 4th chapter. If you're doing it as a group, everybody could take turns, whatever, but read through the whole 4th chapter. But also keep in mind, between Bible studies, so each week you should be reading the entire book of James. I know you say, well, I'm going to be reading it a lot. Yes, so that by the end of this Bible study, by the end of this series, you will have a phenomenal understanding of the book of James. And that's what we want. We want a great and powerful understanding of the Word of God. And this book is just a profound book of great wisdom that James gives to us. So please pause the video and read the 4th chapter at this time. Okay, I trust that you have the 4th chapter read. Let's get into this. I'm going to read verses 1 through 7. James 4, verse 1, he writes, "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask, you do not receive, because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you think that the Scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously?" Verse 6, "But he gives more grace. Therefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." We understand and we see here that James uses some very strong language to make his point. And I want to go through this because there's some nuggets of truth in there that I don't want us to miss or misunderstand. Because often we would read something like this and say something like, well, I'm not a friend of the world, I'm okay. I'm not warring with anybody, I'm not murdering anybody, I haven't committed adultery, I must be all right. And often completely miss the point of what's being made. So let's dig into this and see this. James begins in verse 1, "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members?" Now, at first look, we might be thinking of church and think, you know, the members of the church, that the wars and fights among us come from the members among us. And that's not what he is saying. But anyways, James asks this question, where do wars and fights come from among you? Or to ask it another way, when we break down the original language, we could write it this way or ask it this way. What causes you to argue and quarrel with one another? However, when he puts war and fight, that is not a bad translation. That's what those words actually mean, warring and fighting. But let me offer my own paraphrase, if you will, my own translation. The strife and disputes among yourselves, where do they come from? I mean, that's just the first portion. Where do they come from? So James goes on to answer his own question by asking a question. Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? Now, the word or the words desire for pleasure is one word in the original language. These words, desires for pleasure, is actually one word in the Greek, and it's hedon, where we get hedonism. And the word literally means desires for pleasure. But the word hedonism that comes from this word is the belief that pleasure or happiness is the most important goal in life. So those that are involved in hedonism hedonistic kind of ways. They're after pleasure, their own personal pleasure, more than anything else in life. And so James is asking that question, and he's looking, do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? And the word war is a military expedition, or just that, war. But the word members is really interesting because it literally means the limbs of your body. Not the members of a church or the body of Christ, but your own limbs, your own members of your own body. So he's writing this, isn't it because of this desire for pleasure that you put above everything else that is actually within you, and it's warring within you? Let me read this in some other translations, verse 1 in other translations, so you can kind of get a different viewpoint than the New King James. In the Complete Jewish Bible, it says it this way: what is causing all the quarrels and fights among you? Isn't it your desires battling inside you? It's your desires battling inside you. The Tree of Life version says it this way: where do quarrels and conflicts come from among you? Don't they come from this, namely your passions that battle within your body parts? Now that might seem strange to us at first, because when we read this, just like I said, surface level, war in our members, we just might think, oh, the members in the church, or members in society, members in a business, or in a family. That's not what it's pointing out. It's the war that goes on within you. So let me build upon this a little bit. James is pointing out that the problems we face with others outwardly begin within ourselves. He uses a word, members, that speaks to the member or limbs of a person. The desires for pleasure actually cause strife between a person's limbs, or the members, the parts of his own body. I'll give you an example. And I think we've all can attest to the first one here. The stomach is a member of your body. Stomach is hungry and craving maybe food in general, a certain type of food. This can cause you, what we have coined, to be hangry. That's hungry and angry put together. You're angry because you're hungry. You're testy, you're touchy. You have a short temper. Why? Because you're hungry. You could have strife with people outside, outside of you, of course, because of the inward struggle inside. It's a desire for something that's on the inside that causes you to have problems with people on the outside. In the same manner, in the same way, a person that is thirsty, desiring a certain type of drink, or just a drink in general, can become angry, frustrated, and have problems with people on the outside because of an issue that's going on the inside. Seeing something someone else owns can cause jealousy. Again, a war or a desire to have what somebody else has inwardly can cause you to have a problem word out. I've seen this many, many times, that where somebody gets angry or bitter at another person because they have a nicer car or nicer clothes or a bigger house, and they just, they cut themselves off from that person, and there's strife that builds up because of an inward struggle. Or how about this one? Seeing someone of the opposite sex and becoming turned on by them. That can certainly cause problems outside, depending on what you do with those feelings that you have inside, especially if you're married. So these are things that are very real. And I just gave you a basic rundown, but this can be even greater. There's many people that have been murdered. I mean, you look at the mob murders and these different types of things, and drug murders, or people just in drugs. Why? It comes down to they have a war inside that they take outside, and it affects other people. They want it, and they desire it here first, and then it causes strife with people out there. And that's very much in a church as well. Okay? Now, of course, this is merely a short list of the things that can cause that cause an internal battle. These become a type of war within that doesn't stay within. Feelings such as these often become the seedbed for strife and quarreling outwardly. Get enough people in a church that struggle in this manner, and you can imagine the strife that that can cause. Now, verse 2 goes on to say, you lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. Now, again, some very strong language. You lust and do not have. That means to covet, to so want it so bad that you'd almost do anything for it. Goes on to say, you murder and covet. Again, murder. I mean, what strong language James is using here. Murder and covet. The word covet is to burn with zeal for something. So in this sense, it's a negative. Now that could be a positive, burn with zeal for the things of God. But he's pointing out the negative. You have that same type of zeal that you should have for the things of God, but now for other people's things or things that are off limits for you. And you cannot obtain. It says you murder. And the word murder literally means to slay, to kill, to murder. You covet, you have a zeal for it, a passion for it. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. Now these are, again, some very strong words that James is using. James uses strong language or words to describe the actions of the people he is writing to. Words such as lust, murder, covet, fight, and war. These to describe the way people were trying to obtain the things they wanted. Now, I'm not sure if the people were actually fighting and killing one another that he was writing to, that James was writing to. But James did use these words for a reason. But nonetheless, they were engaging in an activity that caused James to use such harsh words to describe, if not their actions, then their state of mind or their state of heart. That inward struggle. I believe James was addressing heart issues more than actions. Often people would do things and say things that can hurt another person, such as character assassination. Now the reason I'm bringing this up is because in the church, at least in my lifetime, I haven't seen too many people murder somebody to try to get their position at a church, or their car, or their wife, or their girlfriend, or their money. Now we hear of those things going on in the world, but I haven't personally heard of that in the church, at least not the churches that I've been associated with. But what I have seen far too often, it's almost become normal, is this character assassination. Now Merriam-Webster's says this about character assassination. The slandering of a person, usually with the intention of destroying public confidence in that person. So it's things you say and you do to destroy that person, maybe not physically murder them, but destroy people's trust in them. Well, to assassinate their character. If they have a good reputation, good character, you assassinate that good reputation, their good character, to make them look bad in the eyes of others. We see this especially in the world of politics, but unfortunately, that has crept into the church. Now again, I don't know too many Christians that go around and actually fight, kill, and make war with other believers, but again, I have seen Christians attack the character of another believer. And it can look like this. Now this again is just a short list, just to make a point. The small church pastor that attacks the character of the large church pastor. Why? Because he's jealous of that he has the small church and the other guy has the big church. The poor attacking the character of the rich. And yes, that even happens in the church. I've heard this with Christians who maybe not be very high on the economic scale, really slandering the people that are a little bit more wealthy, even in the church. Fundamentalists attacking the Pentecostals and the Charismatics. Or, in reverse, the Pentecostals and Charismatics attacking the fundamentalists. You know, look at those guys. They're of the devil. They speak in tongues. Well, look at those guys. They're of the devil. They don't speak in tongues. We see this kind of thing all the time. In all of this, usually out of jealousy for what the other one has. Like fundamentalists point the finger at Pentecostals and Charismatics if they seem to have their churches growing. Pentecostals, Charismatics point the finger at fundamentalists if they see that their churches are growing. And it really gets terrible in the area of that character assassination. Now, I'm not talking that we're not allowed to have differences of opinion or differences of theology or difference. And if somebody is spewing something that's nonsense, biblically, theologically, then we have the right to address that issue. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about character assassination. Like right here in our own hometown, there are a lot of pastors that I am at odds with theologically. Okay? But honestly, I don't know that any of them are in like direct sin, like they're cheating, they're committing adultery, murder, things of that nature. So I have nothing to say about their actual character. Theology, maybe, but their character, no. So I do my best. Now, I don't know if it comes across that way, but in my heart of hearts, I'm not trying to destroy the person. But if I am going to address something theologically, I'm just trying to go after the theology of it for the protection of the people in my church and those around me, not to destroy another person. Now, again, I am not perfect. I'm not saying it comes out that way all the time, but I do my best not to do that. And I'm still working on it. I'm a work in progress, ladies and gentlemen. So how do we do this character assassination, or let's not even call it that necessarily. How do we murder and make war and fight, in the church? Usually through gossip and slander. And we try to make it sound and seem and look so, spiritual. Like I know we made a joke out of this, but it's still true. Somebody calls another person in the church and says, guess who we need to pray for and why? And an hour-long conversation has no prayer in it, but just slander and gossip. But it was okay, okay, because it started with, we need to pray for so-and-so. We need to pray for A-Rob. And here's why, and then starts the slander and the gossip. Let me read some verses here. Primarily, it looks like they're all out of Proverbs, but I want to show you what Proverbs, remember, James is to the New Testament what Proverbs is to the Old Testament, and you really should read both and get familiar with James and Proverbs. But Proverbs 11:13 says this, a gossip reveals secrets, but one who is trustworthy conceals a matter. Proverbs 16:28 says this, and that was in the Tree of Life version, and this is in the Tree of Life version as well. A perverse person sows strife, and a gossip separates close friends. Tree of Life version, Proverbs 18:8 says this, the words of a gossip are tasty morsels, going down into the innermost being. So gossip, when a person listens to gossip, it literally goes into their innermost being, their heart of hearts, and it perverts them from the inside and the deep places. And it feeds the war and the strife and the struggling within the members, which eventually will come out and affect the members out here. You see, that's why gossip is so dangerous and so wrong, and it's so wicked. No matter how we package it, we need to pray for this person. Let me tell you this because I just want to warn you in the spirit, my brother. And then we gossip. And it's a lie and it's a perversion. And the reason I'm reading from these different translations, because the New King James calls a gossip a talebearer. It's the same thing. It's the same understanding. Someone who bears or brings a tale against another person. But in our day and age, we don't always use the word talebearer. We use the word and we understand the concept and idea of gossip. So that's why I went ahead with these other translations. So I hope that's okay with you. Proverbs 20, verse 19 in the Complete Jewish Bible says this: a gossip goes around revealing secrets, so don't get involved with a talkative person. Now I want to clarify that because I know a lot of talkative people that aren't gossips. So it's not painting a picture of everybody that's talkative. It's just that seems to be the general rule of thumb. The people that talk a lot usually, not 100%, but usually are gossips. And so the writer of the Proverbs should say, just don't get involved with that person. You know, and I would have to agree. You know, so be careful. But they reveal secrets. And listen, you might feel special because they reveal secrets to you, but they're revealing secrets about you to somebody else. My wife and I were just having this discussion yesterday, and it didn't have to do with gossip per se, but we knew somebody that we were close to, that it seemed like this person would go through these patterns where they would be close to a person and then suddenly be at odds with them, and usually over silly things. And we stayed close to this person, now foolishly, I realize now, because, well, we were close to them, they won't do it to us, that was the other person, I'm sure they had their problems. And the problem is that this person would tell us about it, and we didn't really even need to know. But I felt special because I was that person's special confidant. Then, it took many years, but then finally that person did the exact same thing to me that I had witnessed them do to many others. And suddenly I didn't feel so special anymore. I really didn't feel special anymore. And so it goes that way with gossips. That people who gossip a lot to you, trust me, they're gossiping about you to somebody else, because that's who they are and that's what they do. Just keep that in mind. Proverbs 31:13 says this: for I hear the slander of many. Now we're talking about slander because that's what gossip ultimately does. I hear the slander of many. Fear is on every side. While they take counsel together against me, they scheme to take away my life. Proverbs 10:18 says this: whoever hides hatred has lying lips. Whoever spreads slander is a fool. So if you're listening to people that are gossiping about others, slandering others, you're listening to a fool. And what does that really make you? In regards to the story I just told you about what I witnessed and what I had to go through, it made me as much a fool as the person that I trusted, because they eventually turned on me and did exactly to me what I've witnessed them to do to so many others. And I really had to learn a valuable, painful lesson on all that. And I want to wrap this portion up where it says in Proverbs 26:20, again, this is the New Living Translation: fire goes out without wood, and quarrels disappear when gossip stops. So remember, James says, where do these wars and these fights, these quarrels come from among you? Isn't it with the fighting that's going on inside of you? How do you stop quarrels out here? Stop gossiping. Stop gossiping. Quarrels and fights, and to put it this way, wars out here stop when we stop listening to and spreading gossip. And the person that listens to gossip is just as guilty, if you will, as the person that speaks the gossip. Because the person that speaks the gossip would have no gossip to spread if people would stop listening. I don't know how many times we've had to cover this in different areas, in different ways in the ministry over the years, that, you know, we'd have people say, well, they just keep coming and talk to me. I have to give an ear to them. I want to listen to them. I want to help. I want to bless. You know, nonsense. You don't, these ears are not garbage cans. You're just as guilty for allowing the garbage to go in as the person that wants to put it in. Okay? Because if the hearer would stop listening, the gossip would stop and the quarrels would stop. So keep that in mind.